If you look around the world right now, I mean, depression is just such a huge challenge. It affects something like, what, 300 million people?
Easily. It's massive.
But we're here today to really dig into something that maybe gets overlooked a bit, the physical side of it. For so long, we've kind of put depression in this purely mental health box.
Right. Siloed it off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the evidence is really piling up now, isn't it? Showing how deeply it's connected physically with chronic diseases.
Absolutely. And that's our focus for this deep dive. We're unpacking a really comprehensive 2025 cohort study. It was published in BMC Psychiatry.
Okay.
And these researchers, they used this incredible resource, the UK Biobank data set, huge numbers, and they asked a very specific question.
Which was?
Basically, if you've got a history of depression, how much does that actually raise your risk of developing several major chronic physical conditions down the line?
And they zeroed in on a particular mechanism, right? A possible biological link.
They did. The investigation really centered on this idea of chronic, low-grade inflammation.
Inflammation. We hear that word a lot these days.
It's the common thread they were chasing. We have some evidence that depression itself might, come before and maybe even boost these pro-inflammatory markers floating around in the body.
Things like cytokines, interleukin-6, CRP.
Exactly. IL-6, C-reactive protein. And these aren't just passive bystanders. They seem to actively play a role in developing a whole range of, age-related and inflammatory diseases.
Okay, so which specific conditions did they track in the study? The ones linked to this inflammation idea?
They picked 6 key ones. So you've got serious cardiovascular issues like coronary heart disease, CHD, and peripheral arterial disease, PAD.
Right.
Then type 2 diabetes, T2D. Also conditions affecting the joints and gut. So inflammatory arthritis, IA, and inflammatory bowel disease, IBD.
Okay, quite a range.
And then one major neurological one, Parkinson's disease, PD.
Got it. So 6 conditions, all potentially linked by inflammation. Okay, let's unpack this. How strong was this initial connection? That first look before they started, filtering things out, it sounds like it was pretty shocking.
Yeah, the initial findings really jumped out, partly just because of the sheer scale we're talking about.
How big are we talking?
They had data from over 172,000 participants in the UK Biobank. And critically, almost 31,000 of those people already had a recorded history of depression when the study started.
Wow.
And then they followed everyone for a median time of about 7.1 years.
7 years. That's a decent follow-up period to see how things develop.
Definitely.
So just looking at those raw numbers, basically just adjusting for age and sex, what did that first simple Model 1 show?
Well, it was pretty stark. It showed that a history of depression was significantly associated with a higher risk for all 6 of those conditions. Every single one.
I call 6, no exceptions at that stage.
Nope. And not only that, the Kaplan-Meier curves, which sort of visualize the rate things happen, showed participants with depression developed each condition significantly faster than those without.
Faster. And we're not talking small increases in risk here, are we?
Yeah.
Can you give us a feel for just how big that jump was?
Oh, it was substantial.
Yeah.
Let's take peripheral arterial disease, PAD. People with depression had a 58% increased likelihood, that's a hazard ratio of 1.58 of developing it.
58%, that's quite a jump.
It is. And for type 2 diabetes, the risk was 42% higher, hazard ratio 1.42. Even for coronary heart disease, it was up by 36%, so HR 1.36. Really significant numbers across the board initially.
Okay, hold on. Just for listeners, maybe not everyone deals with hazard ratios every day. When you say a 58% increased hazard, what does that actually mean for someone listening?
That's a great point. It means basically compared to someone else who's the same age and sex but doesn't have that history of depression.
Right.
You were 58% more likely to actually develop peripheral arterial disease during that 7-year follow-up period. So it confirms what we've sort of seen hinted at in previous studies, these broad associations.
Yeah, I think I've seen figures like depression linked to maybe 80% higher risk for heart disease, 60% for diabetes in other analyses.
Exactly. Those kinds of numbers are out there from meta-analyses. But, and here's where it gets really interesting, just because 2 things are associated, it doesn't mean one causes the other, right?
Correlation isn't causation, the classic line.
Precisely. The real insight starts when we try to figure out if depression itself is the independent driver, or, as you put it earlier, if it's just traveling with a dangerous crowd of other factors.
I like that. So the researchers basically said, okay, let's line up all the usual suspects, the things that often go hand in hand with depression, and see if depression still looks guilty when we account for them.
That's exactly the idea. They used a more sophisticated statistical model. They called it Model 3. They wanted to see if those really big risk numbers, like that 58% for PAD, would actually hold up once they factored in the messy reality of, well, life and health.
Okay, so what's got thrown into the mix for Model 3? What did they adjust for? It sounds like quite a list.
It was comprehensive. They started with socio-demographic stuff like ethnicity or people lived in the UK, deprivation levels.
Standard factors.
Right. But the really critical adjustments were for lifestyle and health behaviors, things we know often cluster with depression.
Like what specifically?
Okay, so smoking status, current, former, never, how often people drank alcohol, levels of physical activity, specifically low activity, sleep disturbance, which is huge in depression, and body mass index, BMI.
Okay, that's a lot of lifestyle stuff. And I noticed one other adjustment that seems really key. They also controlled for the number of physical health problems people already had at the start. The baseline morbidity count.
Yes, that's absolutely crucial because maybe people with depression are just starting out sicker,
No,
right?
you might already have other conditions.
Exactly. So statistically, they were asking, okay, take two people, same age, same sex, same lifestyle habits, same BMI, same number of pre-existing conditions. Then does having depression still increase your risk?
The moment of truth. So after factoring in that whole massive list of potential confounders, lifestyle, BMI, sleep, existing illnesses, what happened to that strong initial link?
This is really the aha moment of the whole study. After they fully adjusted for all those factors,
Yeah.
that powerful association between depression and 5 of the 6 conditions
Yes.
vanished.
Vanished.
Completely.
Statistically speaking, yes. The link between depression and coronary heart disease, peripheral arterial disease, type 2 diabetes, inflammatory bowel disease, and inflammatory arthritis was no longer statistically significant. It just didn't hold up. Wow. Okay, so let that sink in. For 5 major chronic diseases, the depression itself wasn't the direct, independent cause of the increased risk. Once you accounted for lifestyle and existing health, the connection basically disappeared.
That's the main takeaway. It strongly suggests that for most of these conditions, the heart stuff, the diabetes, the inflammatory gut and joint issues, the link we see with depression isn't caused by the depression per se.
But by the things that often come with depression.
Exactly. It seems to be driven by things like being less active, maybe having disturbed sleep, perhaps a higher BMI, or just carrying a higher burden of other physical illnesses already. Those associated factors seem to be the real engine pushing up the risk.
Okay, but you said 5 out of 6. Every good story needs a twist, right? There was one condition where the link didn't vanish.
That's right. There was one major outlier, one piece of the puzzle that didn't fit the pattern after the full adjustment.
And that was?
Parkinson's disease, PD. The association there remains statistically significant even in that fully adjusted Model 3.
Interesting. So even after accounting for smoking, BMI, activity levels, everything else,
Yeah.
the link between prior depression and later Parkinson's diagnosis still held strong.
It did. The increased hazard for developing Parkinson's stayed substantially elevated. It was still 45% higher for those with a history of depression.
For 45% higher risk. So what's going on there? Why would Parkinson's be different? It can't just be the usual lifestyle suspects if adjusting for them didn't erase the link like it did for the others.
Precisely. That suggests a fundamentally different mechanism might be at play for Parkinson's. And the most compelling explanation the researchers discussed is something called reverse causation.
Reverse causation, meaning the cause and effect is flipped from what we might initially think.
Exactly. Instead of depression causing Parkinson's down the road, the idea is that the very early stages of Parkinson's disease itself might manifest as depression long before the more obvious motor symptoms appear.
Ah, so the depression isn't the cause. It's actually an early symptom of the Parkinson's that hasn't been diagnosed yet.
That's the hypothesis. We know that patients who eventually get diagnosed with Parkinson's often experience significant depressive symptoms, sometimes anxiety too, for years, maybe even a decade before the tremors or the stiffness really become noticeable.
Wow.
So when this study measured depression at baseline, for some individuals, that depression might have actually been the prodromal phase, the very early non-motor sign of an emerging neurodegenerative disease.
So the depression was like a Trojan horse, signaling the Parkinson's that was already underway, just hidden. That has huge implications for early detection, doesn't it?
It really does. Of course, there are other possibilities, too. It could point towards some shared biological pathways, maybe certain genetic variations that make people susceptible to both depression and Parkinson's, pathways that are different from the lifestyle-driven ones for the other conditions.
Okay, that makes sense for Parkinson's.
Yeah.
But let's circle back to the other 5 diseases. the heart disease, diabetes, IBD, arthritis, where the link did disappear when lifestyle was factored in. If things like low physical activity, high BMI, disturbed sleep are what made that association go away, maybe we shouldn't just think of them as confounders, like statistical noise to be removed. Maybe they're more central.
Yes, absolutely. This is a really crucial conceptual shift. Moving from thinking about these factors as just confounders to potentially thinking of them as mediators.
Okay, explain that difference, confounder versus mediator.
So a confounder is just something else that's associated with both depression and the physical illness, muddying the waters. But a mediator is something that sits on the causal pathway between the two.
Ah, like a stepping stone.
Exactly. If depression leads to changes in behavior, like you become less active or your sleep gets disrupted, and those behaviors then promote chronic inflammation or metabolic changes,
Which then increases the risk of, say, type 2 diabetes or heart disease.
then those lifestyle factors aren't just noise. They are the mechanism through which depression exerts its effect on physical health, at least for these conditions.
Okay, so the study isn't necessarily saying inflammation isn't the link. It's saying the way depression might trigger that inflammation is largely through these modifiable lifestyle behaviors.
Precisely. It refines the inflammation hypothesis. It highlights that these lifestyle factors are key drivers, key levers in that link between depression and many chronic physical illnesses.
And if they're key levers, that sounds actionable.
Hugely actionable. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the findings provide really strong support for a more integrated approach to healthcare.
Integrated care, what does that mean in practice for maybe someone listening or for doctors?
Well, the big clinical takeaway for you listening and definitely for health practitioners is that we really can't effectively treat the mind in isolation from the body or vice versa. This study strongly suggests that healthcare providers should be prioritizing screening for and actively intervening on lifestyle risk factors among people diagnosed with depression.
So when someone comes in with depression, don't just focus on the mental health symptoms, but actively ask about and address things like physical activity, sleep, diet, BMI.
Exactly. Things like implementing dedicated sleep management programs, finding ways to support increased physical activity, offering weight management support. These become really crucial parts of managing depression itself because they directly tackle the pathways leading to increased physical disease risk.
Because addressing those specific behaviors,
Wow.
the inactivity, the poor sleep might directly block that pathway towards developing heart disease or diabetes later on.
That's the implication. It's about integrating proactive physical health risk management right into routine mental health care. It needs to be part of the standard package.
Okay, so let's try and sum this up. What does this all mean? The core finding from this deep dive seems to be, yes, depression is strongly linked to a higher risk of chronic physical diseases, and inflammation is likely involved. But for many common conditions, like heart disease and type 2 diabetes, this study powerfully suggests that it's the lifestyle factors and existing health problems, often accompanying depression, that are really driving that risk.
Yeah.
They mediate the connection.
That's a great summary, with Parkinson's disease being this really interesting exception, strongly linked, possibly because the depression is actually an early sign of the disease itself, that reverse causation idea.
And the researchers were clear that more work is needed, right?
Yeah.
To really nail down these pathways.
Oh, definitely. They highlighted the need for future research using more advanced methods like formal mediation analysis to really confirm that these lifestyle factors are truly on the causal path. And we still need more studies looking directly at inflammatory biomarkers like C-reactive protein levels over time to connect all the biological dots.
Makes sense. It's complex stuff.
It really is. And, we've spent this whole discussion talking about how depression might precede or contribute to physical illness. But here's a final thought, maybe something provocative for you to mull over. Flip it around. Think about the immense stress, the daily burden of actually living with a severe chronic physical illness, maybe debilitating inflammatory arthritis, or managing advanced type 2 diabetes day in, day out.
Yeah, that takes a huge toll.
How much does that physical reality contribute to the onset, or perhaps the worsening of depression? Could it be that for many people, these things become locked in a dangerous feedback loop?
Like a cycle. The physical illness worsens mood. The low mood makes it harder to manage the physical illness.
Exactly. A self-perpetuating cycle, trapping people between physical and mental health challenges. It just highlights how intertwined these really are, likely working in both directions.
And that's a wrap on this episode of MedDecode. I really appreciate you joining me today. If something we talked about sparked your interest, Or if there's a medical term that's been bugging you, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, be a pal and share it with a friend. We'll catch you on the next one.